So let's go ahead and just set something up so we can do some interacting, shall I say. So I'm just going to go back to the main blueprints folder and go ahead and create a blueprint interface. I'm going to go ahead and call this BPI underscore interactable. Of course, if you've already got your own interaction system set up, then this step itself is probably going to be a little bit redundant, as you want to hook into your own system. But I'm going to go ahead and open that up, and the first function in here I'm going to call is called interact. Interact. And for this we need to add an input, which is going to be the instigator, and that's going to be of type actor. Okay, and the next one we're going to add is conversation closed. And then the third one, I'm going to call this one show interactable. So the first one is going to be a function for when a particular actor or whatnot has been physically interacted with. The second one is going to be what gets called on the player when a conversation has been closed. And then the show interactable is just a way to visually show that, hey, you can interact with this thing that you're near or looking at, that type of thing. So it's going to be just a quick thing to set up. Okay, so with that done, we want to go ahead and set up just an NPC, blueprint class, of type character, do this, do it as an NPC, NPC base, there we go. So just open that one up, and then what we need to do is on the class settings, just make sure we add the interface that we just created, so the that one. What we will need as well, which is good to store, and that's the instigator, which it won't let me. I'll do it as interact instigator. There we go. And that needs to be of type of actor. This is just so that we have a reference to whatever is trying to interact with this particular NPC, so that way we can send sort of messages between them. So going to the viewport, so we've already got a mesh there. I'm going to go ahead and just assign a default mesh. We'll choose money, bring him down, and what we're going to do as well is just add a text component, a text renderer. We'll call this character name, and then we will create a variable for that text, so character name, which also won't be, let me rename these to there we go. Make sure it's the same type. Okay. Compile. So leave that blank for now. So we'll be able to set that in any child blueprints that we have. So then if we come to the construction script, we can just grab the name and we can set the text on the text renderer. And we'll just connect the character name into there. So that'll just update the character name. So if we was to put something in here, NPC1, so you can see that has updated. So it does need to be moved up, so we'll go ahead and do that. And then we just want to change a few settings just so it lines up a little best. That's going to be center on the horizontal alignment. And then it also looks like the characters are rotated a little bit. So we're going to go ahead and just rotate the mesh component, just so it's all facing the same way as the arrow. Okay, so then coming to the event graph, what we want to do is just show interactable. Actually, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to go back to the Blueprint interface, and on the show interactable, I'm just going to rename that to set interactable state. Probably going to be a better names for these, and then just add an input for a ball, and then just going to call that can show interact. So save and compile, and then we'll go back to the MPC. We'll see those changes have happened on there. So from the can show interactable, we can then go ahead and add a branch. So whatever this is called, we can kind of like toggle between it. What I'm going to do is on the name, I'm just going to set the visibility. Depending on the sort of project you're doing, you might want to have an outline show up instead, or something like that. Trigger a wave animation. It's up to you how it is you want to do something. Okay, so set visibility, so when it's new visibility thing, yeah, that's false. And then lastly, we just want to make sure the visibility on this particular icon is false to start with, so you just select it under the rendering section, just uncheck the visibility. This just means that it won't be visible to start with until the player's within range of it. And that should happen on all NPCs. Okay, so that should be that setup. So what we can then do is just create a child from the NPC base. So NPC, give them a name, mouse. That's so. And then when we come in here, you can edit the text. So if you can't see it, you might need to come up to the little gear at the top and click where it says show inherited variables. And then we can modify that there, so we'll call him mouse. That's so. I'm just going to remove those. And what we do need to do is, when we interact, the first thing we want to do is update the interact instigator. Like so. And then from here, that's where we would then sort of start the conversation, as it were, which we can't do just yet because we've not got any, but we'll come back to that in a second. So with that done, let's go ahead and just set up the third person character. So everything that's in here is just what's the default stuff. So let's have a quick think. So we will need a new input as well, come to think of it. Yeah. So what we can do in the folder structure, assuming you've dealt with the template, there should be an input section. Sorry, an input folder, and inside there should be an actions one. So if you come in here, right click, go down to input and a new input action. I'm going to call this IA_interact. You just want to make sure that's a type bool, which it already is. And then if you go back to the main input folder and the IMC_default, if you open that up, under the mapping section you should see 3 already for the jump, move and look, and want to add a new one, and we want to select the interact. And from here you can then select the key bindings that would trigger that particular input event. So for this I'm going to choose keyboard. Well, I'm going to choose E on the keyboard, so we'll find it. There we go. And then if we save that, we go back to the third person character, and if we search for IA_interact, we then have the input for the interact stuff. So what we will need to do, I'm just going to just disable the show inherited variables again, just so it looks a bit tight on there. So we do need a reference to what we're interacting with. So I'm just going to create a new variable and call that interactable, and that itself is going to be of type actor. Like so. And then what we can do is get a reference to that, and then just perform a quick check on it, so is valid. So from the started, we call the is valid. So it's just saying, hey, is there a reference in here? If there is, that's great. We can go ahead and call the interact interface from the interactables, like so. And then for the instigator, we just set that reference to self. So we're essentially just passing the reference to the character to whatever we're interacting through that particular function. If it's not valid, then in this instance we're not going to do anything. Obviously that option's there is if you're wanting to be able to. Now, you may have noticed that in terms of this variable interactable, we're not actually setting that value anywhere, so it's always going to be not valid. So what we need to do is add a way of being able to populate it. So what I'm going to do is add a sphere collision to this particular play character, and I'm going to call that interact radius. So if we go to the viewport, you'll be able to see that. And what I'm going to do is actually increase the size. 128, that seems okay. So if we come in contact with anything within that particular radius, it'll interact with this, and then we'll be able to do something. So going back to the main event graph, if you right click on the interact radius and then go to add event, there should be some for overlap. So on component begin overlap, and then we also need the on component end overlap as well. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is on the other actor, so we want to pull from there, and then want to do not equal. And we just want to check to make sure that whatever's overlapping that particular sphere isn't the itself, essentially. Otherwise it kind of gums up the logic a bit. And then we want to connect that to a branch. So if it's not itself, we can then move on. And then what we want to do is do another branch, and we actually want to check to see if the actor that has overlapped with it, if it implements the blueprint interface for the interactable. So you can add the does implement interface, and then you want to choose the BPI interactable, and then we connect that up to the branch. So if it's overlapped with something that isn't the interactable, that doesn't have that, then it doesn't do anything. If it does, what we can then do is get the interactable reference that we have, check if it's valid. So is this something that we've already got as an interactable? If there is, what we then want to do is do the set, I'm trying to remember the name of the function now, the set interactable state. And we want to set this to false. So what this does is just if there's anything that's interactable already, it will, in this instance, it will make the text hidden again before we do anything with the new one that we've interacted with. And once we've done that, we can just set the interactable to empty, and then we can come down and actually set it to the reference from all the way over here. If the interactable isn't valid, then we can just go ahead and set it straight away. And we'll quickly tidy this up a little bit. Like so. And then the last thing we need to do is just set up the end overlap. So we want to do something similar here where we're just checking to make sure it's not itself. So grab the other component. So if it's not itself and it's true, then we can come in and do that. Just thought. Actually, we want to check to make sure that that's ended the overlap actually matches what we have already. So we can do that as and. Like so. And what this will do is it'll just set the text to being invisible again. Okay, so we should be able to test that a little bit of logic there. So I'm just going to drag the mouse character in. Oh, like so. And then the character, is it working? No, can't see the text. So let's do a quick debug. So what we can do, I'm going to do play in new editor window, so it's floating. And then on the third person character, just make sure the third person character spawned is selected. And then what we can do is make sure it's visible. Okay, so it looks like it's trying to do something. So it's nothing in there. That's what if it's in the base. So we'll open up the base character. And in that one again for the debug, just select the mouse. Okay, so it looks like it's not actually firing the state. No, of course, yeah, we've not added that one, have we? There we go. Yeah, so we just need to add the set interactable state at the end when we set the interactable. Now we should get the name that pops up above the NPC's head, which means that if we press E, it will attempt to interact with that particular character. At the moment, it doesn't do anything. Because we haven't set that up yet, so other than setting the interact instigator. So at this particular point, it's just a case of setting up some dialogue. So what I'll do now is a sort of demonstration of how you can actually use this system to create sort of dialogue that you want. Going back to your blueprints folder, you want to find your base dialogue actor component, and you want to right click and create a child blueprint. I'm going to call this dialogue mouse, just because it's for the mouse NPC. We'll save that. What we can then do is come over to the NPC mouse and we can add that component. So dialogue mouse, like so. And then we can actually drag that straight into the event graph and call the the open conversation function. Like so. So in terms of the NPC, that's all set up to actually show that particular conversation. So what we can now do is go to the dialog mouse. So we open that up. And under the functions section, you want to override the dialog function. Like so. And then it's in here where we would then start adding the dialogue. So with the add dialogue node, like so, we can start putting things in. If you're wanting multiple branches, you can do a switch on int, like so, and then get the tree index, like so. Obviously by default it starts at 0, but if you added multiple branches you can then switch between these however you want. So I'm going to go straight off the first one, call this one mouse, and then for the dialogue, hi, do you have any cheese? And then for the options, I'll just make an array. So we're going to do yes and no. But yeah, so now if we go to the mouse, you see it says how do you have any cheese, and it shows you those particular options. At the moment, however, you can still move around and you don't actually have the mouse cursor. So what we can do is if we come back to the player character, and what we want to do on the interact, we want to set input to UI only. Let's get the player controller, and then we just want to make the cursor visible as well. So show mouse cursor. Like so. So now if we interact, we can't move around, but we do have the cursor. So when you hover over the buttons, the highlights, you can actually pick those. So in this particular instance, it doesn't do anything. So let's go back to the dialog. So what we can then do from the state, we want to do a switch. And the way the switch works is if this particular dialog node has already been displayed to the character, it will do pass through. If it's just updated it, then you get something on the updated. So you could trigger something as soon as it displays. So say if it's like a congratulations message and you're rewarding the player with something, you could do it on the updated. So it happens as soon as the message is done. In terms of the pass through, that's what we want to use if we need to progress to another piece of dialogue. So from the options index, I'm going to do a switch on int and add, in this instance, 2 pins because we've got 2 options here. Like so. And at this point, it's just a case of just copying and pasting, really. So I'm going to copy this whole section. So add one here, and then one down here. So if we choose yes, so for option 0, that's great news. Can I have some? And then the option could be give cheese or keep cheese. If I can spell. There we go. So that's that one sort of set up there. So for this one, it could be oh, that's a shame. I really want some cheese. And then for this one, what we can do is just remove one of the elements. We'll just change that to continue. Like so. So in terms of these particular options, they will progress. So if we choose yes, it'll progress to the next one. That's great news, and it updates the options as well. What we need to do, however, is set up sort of conditions for when the dialogue ends. So for this one here, for whereas no, we've not got any cheese, we could do a few options really. So we can clear dialogue progress. So this just resets it back to the very beginning of the conversation, and then we can just close the conversation. Like so. Up here we can add some more dialogue. So if the player says yes, you can have some cheese, we can do an option of thank you, you're so kind, and then we'll just do the continue again on that one. And then if it says no, let's put you big meanie. Right, so again, just leave those on the continue buttons. So what we can actually do as well. So for the continue, I've got thank you so kind, or you big meanie. We can actually choose to sort of a different branch if you like. Let's have a quick think. So you kind of got, depending on your dialogue tree, you could choose to backtrack if you wanted to go back to a different point, which I'll just do for this example. So remove progress. So remove dialogue progress. So in terms of the steps, we just count. So 1, 2. We'll get us back to this particular one here. So this 1 step and then 2 steps. So when you sort of next interact with them, it can sort of goes back to that particular section. And then we probably just want to close the conversation there as well. And then for this one, what we could do is set tree index, and we'll set that to 1, and then we'll close the conversation. So setting the tree dialog index to 1 means that it's this particular branch that will be used, so it'll ignore everything else. So as an example, we can just copy this row and come to here. So this can be like the sort of return message after you've given us some cheese. You're such a nice person. The great thing with something like this is if you really wanted to, you can actually add some bit of randomness to it. So you just do like a select node, and do nom, and then do random int in range, and just get it to pick a random int between 0 and 1. So whenever this particular option gets called, it'll just pick one of those random dialogue pieces. So that's sort of an option you've got there as well. So yeah, so in terms of that, that's sort of all set up. However, I believe I mentioned in terms of the closed dialogue, we might need to do something in here regarding the player. So in here we did add the option here where it essentially stops the character from moving because it sets it to UI only mode. So in here, in the closed conversation, what we want to do is call the conversation closed. So we can get the get the owner. So this is inside the dialog base. So we'll get the owner, and then we can call the dialog conversation closed function. And what this is going to do is going to try and call that conversation closed in its parent. So in this case, it would be the mouse. So what we can do in here, so we'll put it in the base. So the conversation closed, we want to come in, get the interact instigator, and call the same thing again. Conversation closed. If there's anything you want to do inside the NPC when the conversation is closed, you could do that here in addition. But then if we go to the third person character, we just want to add that BPI in here as well, so the interactable. So we've got the access to the conversation closed in here as well. And then it would just be a case of hiding the mouse cursor and then setting the input to game mode only. So that should all be set up. So if we come in and we talk to the mouse, do you have some cheese? No. And then we close. Okay, so it's closing the dialog, but it's not quite doing anything over here. So what's happening? I believe, yeah, of course, I've not connected the player controller to the input mode, so I'll quickly do that. There we go. So now it should all be working. So if we go down the option of no, to close, and then you get the options again. If you click on him, it comes back to the beginning. Do you have any cheese? So you click yes, and then go to keep cheese. It says you big meanie, and it just starts the conversation again when you interact with him. If you go all the way through, give him the cheese. When you talk to him, it'll choose the random options. So yeah, so that's the dialog system, and how you can set up your own sort of dialog following the sort of branching sort of method here. As I mentioned, you've got quite a lot of flexibility, so you can choose to do things on the updated, or as it passes a particular branch. So you've got quite a lot of control and flexibility in terms of how you set up your dialog. So I hope you find this tutorial useful, and I hope you find this a nice way of approaching a dialog system. So if you've got any questions, by all means leave them in the comments, and if you do use this for any projects, by all means let me know. I'll certainly be interested to see what people make of this. That's great. Thank you. Take care. Bye.